Hey everybody. Hi. Thanks for coming out. This is an awesome audience. I'm just going to say a couple words for Flyleaf, and then I'll hand this over to Art Chansky, who is the author of 10 sports books, including bestsellers The Dean's List, Blue Blood, and Game Changers. But yeah, thank you so much for coming out. Your attendance and support of our store help us have these events, and we love them, so we really appreciate it. Now here over to Art to introduce our wonderful authors here today. Let's just do that. Give it back to you.
Hi, I'm Art.
Hi, Art.
Hi, Art.
Welcome to Flyleaf, which is, we all worried a little bit about an independent bookstore opening in Chapel Hill years and years ago, and it's a grand slam home run for independent bookstores, not only in the area, but all over the country. So thanks for coming. I just want to introduce my good dear friend and partner in some crime, and John, of course, who's approaching halfway to 100 books, right? Halfway, great. These are two incredible people in the media in our country. About 15 years ago, I think was the first time I heard John speak on campus in front of the South Building, and one of the things that he said was, I don't know how many books you'd written by then, maybe 30 or so.
313 books John has written. Okay.
One of the things that he said was, one of the books that he didn't like or thought was bad or disappointed him was the one book that he didn't outline, and it was a message to writers about having to outline and set the road up, decide how you're going to get from the beginning of the road to the end of the road, and decide when you're going to get off the road to tell a story and then get back on the road. And I told that to Jim when we began, and that was sort of the game plan that we followed. And it was a tremendous fun and honor to be able to write Jim's story with him. He took me about a year to convince him that he's a great storyteller and he should write his book. And he would say, I'm a sportscaster. And I said, you're a storyteller. And about a year later, he said, let's do it. And we did it, and it was a lot of fun. So Jim Lampley, Hall of Fame broadcaster, sportscaster from at HBO and every other network in the game of alphabet soup for sports. And John Grisham, the worldwide known best-selling author. Jim.
Thank you, Art. I hope that works. John and I agreed that because of his overwhelming experience in this space, as people now like to say, and because I am a rookie, that John will be the motivator and director of our content up here. And I can't even begin to tell you how gratifying it is and how thrilling it is that the single most acclaimed and largest selling fiction author in our culture should pay me the compliment of both a cover blurb and this appearance on behalf of my only slightly fictitious autobiography, mostly true, and I thank him enormously for being here with me today. John?
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. Happy to be here. Happy to be at Flyleaf. We're popping here all the time. My daughter came to UNC in 2004 as a freshman, and she had 4 glorious years here. Our son went to UVA. We live in Charlottesville, and our son went to UVA, older brother, and we didn't see him for 4 years. Our daughter came to UNC, and we were here every weekend. She joined a sorority down the street and on Franklin Street, and she wanted us here every weekend for ball games, for socials, for formals, for happy hour. It didn't matter. We were in her all the time. And so she graduated in 2008 and has never left. She's now in Raleigh with the grandkids. And when she graduated in 2008, my wife, Renee, had 2 years at Ole Miss. She had the credits for almost 4 years, but she had not finished her degree. And over the years, that became the big regret in her life. And she announced to me one day, she said, I'm going back to college. I'm going to finish my degree. I'm not going to UVA. I'm going to UNC because I'm a Tar Heel. She was born in Raleigh. And always been a Tar Heel. The whole family's just a bunch of obnoxious Tar Heels. And most of them are, Jim. But she came back. She commuted for 2 years from our farm in Charlottesville, 3 hours away, for 2 years. And she was 49 years old. And she was absolutely overwhelmed by the technology. She had missed all that stuff, and it was really a struggle. She got through it. She got her degree from UNC, and she's a very happy Tar Heel now. So we, at one point, had an apartment on Franklin Street next to the KD House, the Presbyterian Church. And then Renee always wanted an old house on Franklin Street in the historic section. So she saw one time. We bought that 10 years ago when our grandson was born. So we're down here all the time. When it was Foster's, it was our favorite hangout, and we came all the time for that. I always stepped next door to the Flyleaf to buy books, and so we're here all the time. We're down here almost every week, especially during basketball season. We have courtside seats at UVA for all those games. We have courtside seats here for all these games. So January, February, and March, all we do is plan basketball trips and games back and forth. The great thing about pulling for a Tar Heel team, you get to go to Final Fours as opposed to UVA. And so we traveled with them all over the place and had way too much fun. I finally met Jim not too many years ago. Somebody said, have you met, well, Jim Lampley was living in the apartment building where we had our condo. And somebody told me that one night, and I said, well, I didn't realize that. We had moved out by then. And so Jim and I met and started hanging out, and we had a few meals together, saw each other at ball games and conversations, and one thing led to the other. And he mentioned, I guess a year ago, they were working on a book. And I said, well, great, one thing led to another, and here we are. And I read the book about 4 or 5 months ago, before it was actually complete. And for those of you who have not read the book, it's very, very entertaining. I write to entertain. I write to take people to places they haven't been before. Jim's book is a wonderful recollection of some of the greatest sports stories that we grew up with in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and even after that. All the great sports stories that we saw, Olympics and football and college basketball and especially boxing, Jim not only was there, he called the games and bouts, but he knew the athletes, and he knew them very well. And when you read the book, you almost want to take out a legal pad and start writing down all of the athletes and actors and famous people that Jim Lampley met over the years. It's just, and he doesn't drop names as much as he just spills them all over the place. but he was there. It's not in an obnoxious way. It's a fun way because he really knew these people. And so the book is a whole lot of fun to read. I can't wait for you guys to get a copy of it and read it. It's a whole lot of fun. And I'm happy to be here tonight, and happy to. These things there's no structure to these. Okay. We have not prepared for this, okay? We're flying by the seat of our pants. And here's my wife. Renee, I was just talking about you. Your seat's up here, honey. Here's our favorite Tar Heel, y'all. Give her a big round of applause.
Renee.
I know. She'll kill me later. But so what we'll do is talk for a few minutes. And I've already been warned. I'm not sure how many of y'all have ever engaged in a conversation with Jim. Once he gets going, it's really hard to stop him. And I got to cut you off at 7. We'll probably save a few minutes at the very end if you guys want to ask questions. That's the fun part, to be with people from the audience to ask questions. And so if you have a question, hang on to it, and we'll try to get to them at the end. So with that, all that ahead of time, let's start the conversation, Jim. And one thing I want to hit on first, in the first chapter of the book, you talk about your family, where you're from, Hendersonville, the death of your father when you were very young, and you talk about your mom, and you say a lot of. Let me get that for you.
Turn it off, Sharon. Come on.
There you go.
Go with the program.
You talk about your mother and being raised by a single mom, you and your brother. And you give her so much credit, but the engaging thing to me was how you were raised, because your mother would not tolerate any trace of racism. And growing up in the Deep South like I did, and like most of us in Jim Crow, looking back, it is astonishing.
It is astonishing.
The level of racism.
I think it's critically important to what ultimately happened in my career. And it's, to me, to this day, inexplicable how a relatively poor Irish-American girl raised in Nashville and Memphis by a mother and father who could not possibly properly pronounce the word Negro, instilled in me this intense devotion to racial justice, racial equality, the idea of treating all people with respect regardless of skin color. It was hugely important to me. It led directly to my idolization of Cassius Clay, who became Muhammad Ali.
We'll get there in a minute.
She gave me a gift which to this day I cannot explain, but it was critically important.
Jim, growing up in Mississippi and Arkansas, I certainly was not, I wasn't raised like that, okay? I didn't know anybody. In my world, in my culture, in my society, I didn't know anybody, the white people who were raised like that. I mean, it was totally, that was so foreign to where of course, we were in the really, really deep South, the worst part of it. But it was, as I read it, I said, how this woman, where did she get that from? Where did it come from?
And the interesting thing is that, by the time I'm learning what I'm learning from her, she had been through World War II as ultimately the wife of two bomber pilots from the same B-29 squadron on Saipan, dropping bombs off of or onto Japan, and in sussing out in my own mind how she might have arrived at her consciousness, I actually went back through her Air Force yearbooks and memorabilia to see if I could see any black faces, and there were none. So it wasn't as if she had gotten this from the cosmopolitan effect of World War II and the military. It was somewhere deep inside her own soul and her own consciousness, because again, I knew her parents, they were my grandparents, and I knew other people from her family, and none of them portrayed what she ultimately portrayed to me, and not just portrayed, but emphasized as a critically important value.
So you came to UNC, what, in 1966?
I come to UNC in the fall of 1966.
So did you meet other white kids with the same attitude, the same tolerance?
Not many. The people I remember in my dormitory in the fall of 1966 watched Jesse Helms and his WRAL-TV editorials, and you certainly wouldn't get that there. And there was a lot of racist patter in the bar that I used to frequent, the Shack on Rosemary Street. And I can recall to this day somewhat suppressing my attitude to get along socially with other people on campus in Chapel Hill. I went to parties at the Kappa Alpha House, all right, and the Kappa Alpha Order styled itself as the inheritor to the Confederacy and its values. So I was kind of passing. I was in a double exposure type of situation at that time because I wanted to be popular in Chapel Hill. But no, I did not meet people like that here in 1966. However, remember, one of my freshman classmates was Charlie Scott. And that was hugely important in ultimately changing attitudes here and changing what was popular and meaningful here. And I had a class with Charlie, and I watched his basketball progression through the school. And eventually they recruited Bill Chamberlain from Long Island Lutheran High School in New York. So I saw the integration of UNC basketball, which migrated into the integration of the ACC in general, and I was, a part of and privy to all of that and ardently supporting it the whole time that it was going on.
So let's talk basketball for a minute. When Charlie Scott came here in 1966,
Fall of '66.
What prompted Dean Smith to recruit him?
Dean Smith wanted to integrate the basketball program. Dean Smith wanted to integrate Chapel Hill in a big way. Dean Smith had already at that point gone to lunch counter demonstrations here in Orange County. He was a supporter of all the civil rights values and the visible symbols of the civil rights movement, and he participated. And because it was Dean Smith, he was able to drag a lot of people along toward a different consciousness. And he totally, I mean, Art knows more about this because he wrote Game Changers, which is a book exactly about this subject. But Dean made clear to Charlie when he brought him here, you're going to be part of an ongoing social change, which is important to this community and this university, and I need you to be ready for the pressures that will go with that. And Charlie handled those pressures very well.
Okay, back to your mom. So you have a brother, your mom's a widow twice, and she left Hendersonville and went to Florida. What prompted that move?
She went to Florida because my father had been given, he was Henderson County's biggest war hero. He had been given a Chrysler dealership. It was a beautiful big building right on the main street of Hendersonville. And then he died of cancer in 1954 at age 35. At that point, there was nobody in the Lampley family who was in any way capable of running the Chrysler dealership, running the Lampley Motors. And my mother had already begun explaining to me, I learned more later about how, you know, there are automobile dealerships in Hendersonville which are actually selling cars, but what your father and your grandfather do is to offer cars for sale, and if somebody sees one on the showroom floor and wants to buy it, then someone will go up to the golf course at the Hendersonville Country Club and try to pull one of them off the golf course to come down and sign the papers. So there was no active selling going on at the Lampley Motors, and my mother realized and understood that very quickly after my father died. 5 or 6 years later, she said, you know, I got to get out of here and I've got to go somewhere where I can earn money to raise my 2 sons. And that wound up being South Florida, because she had liked Florida when she was in Tampa during the war, and because she could learn to sell life insurance. And in getting ready for the book, my beautiful wife, Deborah, found a photograph of my mother in her first New York life insurance sales group. There were 35 men and her. So she had to kind of pioneer that particular thing. But ultimately, she managed to get my brother and me both through junior high school and high school. She sold enough life insurance to keep body and soul together. She had always had a severe heart condition and ultimately died of her after her 4th open heart surgery.
So when you were in Florida, did you know you were coming back to UNC? Was that it?
I was desperate to be back in North Carolina. I would leave Miami every year on the day after school, let out to board the Silver Star or the Silver Meteor to come north. I think it was the Silver Star that brought you north. I would get off of the train either in Columbia, South Carolina, or later when I was in school here in Raleigh. And then when school in Florida was ready to begin in the fall, I would take the opposite. I think it was the Silver Star that went south, and go back to Miami and go to junior high school and high school. But I was emotionally in North Carolina the whole time. I didn't like Florida. I wanted to be here.
So this leads to one of your favorite stories, one of my favorite stories of yours. You're a kid in Florida, and it's 1964, and Cassius Clay is going to fight Sonny Liston for the heavyweight championship. Clay won the gold medal in Tokyo in 1960, and Sonny Liston
won the gold medal in Rome in 1960. In the middleweight division, not as a heavyweight.
Didn't know that. See, you learn all this kind of stuff when you hang out with Jim. But it was a huge fight. Sonny Liston was the heavy favorite. He was a much feared fighter. He'd been champ for a while. He was older, stronger, tougher, meaner, really mean. And I remember, I was only 10 years old, I guess, but I remember following some of the hype, and there was a lot of people there was a lot of fear for Cassius Clay's not his life, but they were afraid that Sonny might kill him because he wouldn't shut his mouth.
Well, he had knocked out Floyd Patterson, also a former Olympic gold medalist, the heavyweight champion prior to Liston. He had knocked him out twice in one round. Okay, both of those fights lasted 2 minutes.
Liston had knocked out Floyd Patterson twice in one round, and Liston was, take your pick, either a 7-1 favorite over Cassius Clay or a 13-1 favorite over Cassius Clay, and it was the biggest upset in heavyweight championship history when Clay actually won the fight. Right, slow down.
Slow down.
I want to hear, this is a good part of the story. You were there for the fight. Tell that story. How'd you get there? How'd you get the money for a ticket? How'd you get in, and where were you sitting?
Because of what my mother had taught me about race relations and my necessary support for civil rights, I was an obsessive and devoted Cassius Clay fan. I knew all the rhymes. I knew all of the ways in which he interacted with the public. I was ardently supportive. My grandparents hated him. My mother loved him. And when I got to Miami, and I was reading the sports pages of the Miami News and the Miami Herald, those two newspapers both had a boxing writer. And I began to read that if a fight was made between Cassius Clay and Sonny Liston, it would most likely take place in the Miami Beach Convention Center. Clay was training in Angelo Dundee's gym, which was on Miami Beach. So I began saving lawn mowing and car washing money for months to buy a ticket to Clay Liston, which was February 25, 1964, in the Miami Beach Convention Center. I do not remember whether that ticket was $100 or $150, but it was something of that nature. I was washing cars for $1.25, mowing lawns for $2, piling up money for months to buy a ticket to go to the fight, and eventually I got to what I needed and I bought the ticket. Very lamentably, I did not save it, all right? If we'd been in this culture at this moment, I would have been smart enough to save that ticket, which today would be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Too bad.
So put things in perspective. This is 3 months after Dallas in November. This is 2 or 3 weeks after the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, and now we have the fight.
The Beatles actually visited Cassius Clay in the gym on Miami Beach.
Before or after?
Before the fight, so that he could recite rhymes for them and they could mug for the cameras and stuff like that. Yes, the Beatles visited him before the fight, and it was an ongoing cascade of publicity, mostly generated by Clay, because Liston was taciturn, Liston was enclosed, Liston was distrustful of anything in the public process, and Clay was seeking to be the biggest public figure in the world.
So when the fighters were introduced, who was the crowd favorite?
Crowd favored Liston. There were very few of us that night who were ardently and vocally rooting for Cassius Clay, because Clay was aggressively bucking the tide of dominant race relations in the United States at that time. And even though Liston was an ex-con with a sinister persona who had knocked out the popular Floyd Patterson, Clay was offensive enough to enough people that more people in the arena were rooting for Liston rather than for Clay. Plus, they didn't think Clay had any chance whatsoever. Right. They thought Clay was likely to die in front of them, not to win the fight.
Who were you sitting with?
So the ticket was individual, and I was sitting basically alone, but there was a man next to me, and in my memory he was 60 plus years old. He might have been 40 plus, I don't know. But there was a man sitting next to me who talked to me during the undercard, realized it was the first live prize fight card I had ever seen, could tell how excited I was, particularly about Clay, and he took enough of a liking to me that he kind of nursemaided me through the evening and helped me manage my excitement in such a way that I wouldn't cause too much of a disturbance among the people around me. And then he gave me boxing pointers and helped to educate me somewhat during the undercard, although I had already probably watched 40 fights at that time on Gillette Friday Night Fights. And then at the end, he turned to me very benevolently and said, "Go ahead and celebrate, son. Your wildest dream has come true."
Okay, let's get back to the dream. The fight starts off, so we're not going round. He can go round by round. We're not doing round by round, okay? The fight went 6 rounds, and Liston
Stopped in the seventh.
Okay. Liston did come out for the seventh, right?
Liston did not.
Come out for his corner at the beginning of the 7th round.
Okay.
That made it a 7th round knockout.
Here's my question to you. I asked you this question before, and I didn't like your answer, okay?
Oh, you don't like my answer? Okay.
No, because Sonny Liston was, a really badass heavyweight champ, okay, and he quit. He wasn't knocked out. It wasn't a TKO. He was sitting on his stool, and when the 7th round started, he didn't get up. And then Clay went crazy. He went, the famous, he's all over the ring, he's jumping up and down. Anyway, Liston quit. All right, hang on. They fought again, 4 or 5 months later in Lewiston, Maine?
That's right.
They fought close to a year later in Lewiston,
okay.
Maine, after the assassination of Malcolm X. And the fight had to be moved from Boston to Lewiston, Maine, because of overwhelming and prevalent rumors that, given the rivalries and animosity that was going on within the Muslim world, the American Muslim world at that time, that if Clay appeared in the ring in Boston against Liston, he might get shot.
He wasn't Clay.
He was now Muhammad Ali.
Yeah.
There would be a revenge assassination. That was something that the authorities in Boston took as true, and therefore the fight was moved from Boston to Lewiston, Maine.
Okay, so he's joined the Black Muslims. He's Muhammad Ali. They meet in Maine, and the fight lasted 30 seconds at the max. And Ali hit Liston with a punch. It was a real punch, okay, but it wasn't a knockout punch. It jolted him a little bit, but he was a big, tough guy.
It was called by a lot of writers at that time a phantom right hand.
Phantom right hand. Liston goes down and stays down. You see
Correct.
The famous photographs of Ali taunting him to get up. So my point is, Liston laid down twice against Clay.
100%. Yes, Liston
Okay.
absolutely quit twice against Cassius Clay.
Okay.
Or Muhammad Ali.
Liston was rumored to hang around with organized crime figures, the underworld. He was a shady guy. Okay. The question I ask you, and I'll ask you again so you can improve on your answer. Why did he lay down? Was he paid?
Well, I don't believe he was paid. Okay, that is not. I mean, a lot of people subscribe to that, but I don't believe that. I believe that he had learned in Miami Beach that there was no way he could handle the speed, particularly the hand speed, the footwork, the dazzlingly amazing boxing skills of Cassius Clay / Muhammad Ali. Liston was old, and there's an enormous body of thought among boxing writers now, including the ones I most respect, that Liston was a heroin addict, and that he had been a heroin addict prior to the first fight with Cassius Clay. So it's not likely that a heroin addict would be able to train at a level necessary to beat one of the greatest athletes in the world at what they were doing. A lot of people just wanted to believe that Cassius Clay / Muhammad Ali was a mirage. He was not a mirage, as he ultimately proved through the course of his boxing career.
What was his next defense after Liston?
Henry Cooper in London, England. And Henry Cooper was a big puncher who, and again, a lot of boxing people thought that Henry Cooper would knock out Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali, and he didn't. And
when he knocked him out, he was saved by the bell.
Yes, that's right. He did catch Ali with a massive right hand and knocked him for a loop, and the bell saved him. That is exactly correct.
Okay, the story goes that Ali did not know where he was. Angelo Dundee got him in the corner and realized that the guy was in trouble. And he took a knife or some instrument and he slashed his boxing glove.
True.
Okay?
True. Did slash the glove.
And he called the rep over and said, hey, the glove's been cut.
Yes.
We got to have new gloves. That took about 10 minutes, get a new pair of gloves, and Dundee saved him.
100% correct. Angelo Dundee brilliantly saved Muhammad Ali in London against Henry Cooper by slicing open the glove
and buying the time necessary for him to recover from the tremendous right hand.
Is it true that in the first fight, Ali wanted to quit after the third or fourth round because Liston was putting something on his gloves that was some kind of poison, not poison, but burning. Ali's eyes were big. He said, I can't see, I can't see, I can't see.
He was blinded.
I'm quitting, I'm quitting, I'm quitting. And Dundee wouldn't let him.
That's correct. It was probably liniment, but there's no question that the people in Sonny's corner juiced up his gloves with something that caused Ali's eyes to blur and made it difficult for him to see, and he tried very hard to quit. And Dundee pushed him back into the ring.
Okay, enough of boxing. Let's get,
No.
he could talk
There's
boxing.
never enough
He
boxing,
could talk
John.
boxing forever. Let's talk about your career. You're UNC. You graduate. How do you go from there to ABC?
So my path through UNC was torturous. After 2.5 years, I'd taken 25 courses. I had passed 17 of them. I had a 1.44 academic average. I needed to go to somewhere and take 2 correspondence courses and make A's on both of them to get back into school. I had never made an A at that point. I went to Miami with my tail between my legs, went back to my mother's apartment in a crappy neighborhood in Coral Gables. There aren't many crappy neighborhoods in Coral Gables, but she managed to find one. I had to apply for a job. The 2 possibilities were management training at the global headquarters of Burger King on Biscayne Boulevard, or mortgage loan file clerk at First National Bank of Miami. I decided that the mortgage loan file clerk job at Miami First National Bank was more glamorous than Burger King. And I spent 13 months reading over FHA and VA loan packages, huge stacks of them, trying to find whether the T's had been crossed and the I's had been dotted, in a room with 4 women between the ages of 62 and 65, 2,000 feet of file cabinets, and me. No windows. So much for the glamour. But eventually, I reached the point where I found time and energy to take 2 correspondence courses, made A's on both of them, made A's on all the assignments. Those were the first A's I had made. And now with fire in the belly, came back to Chapel Hill, got back into school, made a long series of A's to graduate from undergraduate school, and ultimately went to graduate school in radio, television, motion pictures.
That's a preliminary, okay? That's the groundwork. What was your lucky break to get it with ABC, though?
While I was in that master's degree year in radio, television, motion pictures, ABC Sports had learned certain things about engineering that they had not known before from their coverage of the captivity of Israeli athletes by Palestinian terrorists at Munich in 1972. They had learned that radio frequency, meaning wireless, camera signals and microphone signals would go over concrete barriers, that they would go around metal barriers, that they would do things they didn't think they would do. And after the Munich Olympics, everybody from ABC came back to New York. They convened a meeting among the sports, news, and engineering divisions, and the question was, now that we've learned these things from Howard Cosell and Peter Jennings pushing the control room for greater access, now that we've learned these things, what can we do with them? And the first idea they settled on was, we can put in a reporter on the sidelines of a football game. And okay, Bruno Arledge, being the promoter thinker that he was, if we can put a reporter on the sideline of a college football game, we can make that a promotion by making it a nationwide talent search, and we will tell college students on every campus in the country that we're looking for an undergraduate age student to put on the sideline, and we'll go around the country to 16 different locations and interview, as it turned out, 432 of these candidates. Of all the 432, I'm pretty sure I was the one who least fit the description of what they were looking for.
You were too old, for one, right?
I was too old. I was 25. I was not undergraduate age. I was a graduate student, not an undergraduate student. They wanted somebody with absolutely no experience in broadcasting. I had done a lot of work for Jim Hebner at WCHL and the University of North Carolina football and basketball radio networks. Jim's sitting right there, thank you. And as a result of all that, I expected to get flushed out of the screening interview, and I did. I was sent out of the screening interview with a full understanding that there was no way I was going to get this gig because I did not fit the qualifications. But sometimes the best laid plans of mice and men go haywire.
So what was your first game on the sideline?
Tennessee versus UCLA, Knoxville, Tennessee, September 7, 1974. Tennessee coached by 33-year-old Bill Battle, UCLA coached by Dick Vermeil, opening telecast of the season on ABC. I was on one sideline, the Tennessee sideline, and the other person they had chosen, because, you know, in defiance of all their standards, they wound up picking two, not one. The other guy, who was a Stanford graduate named Don Tollefson, was on the UCLA sideline.
What happened to Don Tollefson?
Well, after the first season, and we both went through the entire first season, Don was dispatched to a local television station in Philadelphia to continue on in his career as a sports reporter for the local news in Philadelphia. And I, who had originally been told that this was going to be one season and one season only, was immediately getting assigned to all of the crazy Wide World of Sports telecasts. The first one I did was the Oriental World of Self-Defense, and eventually I was sent to the lumberjack competition, the wrist wrestling competition, the demolition derby, the motorcycles on ice, etc., 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 where I began my apprenticeship in network television.
Where was the wrist wrestling championship?
The wrist wrestling was in Petaluma, California, which is also the home of Charles Schultz, the famous cartoonist, which is also the chicken capital of the world, and a more bizarre event you've never seen.
Listen, don't knock those telecasts. When I was a kid growing up, the Wide World of Sports was every Saturday afternoon. That's the only way we saw boxing matches.
Well, and it was a fabulous entry point for me, because by the time I began doing all those telecasts, all of the veteran Hall of Fame sportscasters on the ABC Sports staff, McKay, Keith Jackson, Bill Fleming, Frank Gifford, various others, they had all done those shows at least once, and now they were into the routine of having to do them multiple times. And now here came a guinea pig who would have to do all of those shows every year for as long as it took for me to get past that apprenticeship. So they didn't like me at first because I was getting assignments with practically no background. They loved me eventually because I was preventing all of them from having to go back to Petaluma, Hayward, Wisconsin, Central Islip, New York, all of the out-of-the-way places where those events took place.
So who made the recording Spanning the Globe to bring you, what's the rest of it?
Jim McKay wrote that.
The thrill of victory and the agony of defeat.
Jim McKay wrote the opening words to ABC's Wide World of Sports, which became iconic, and every television sports viewer in the country could eventually recite. Spanning the globe to bring you the constant variety of sport, the thrill of victory, the agony of defeat, the human drama of athletic competition. It was a well-written little
That's
blurb.
very good, yeah.
Yeah.
What was Jim McKay like?
Standoffish. I wanted him to be my mentor. I wanted to be the person who learned at the feet of Jim McKay. On my first plane ride with him to the United States Outdoor Track and Field Championships in Provo, Utah, I learned that that was not going to be the case.
Okay, who was, of those famous people, who was the most helpful? Who took you under their wing?
You probably wouldn't believe this, but you know, if you're groomed with a great deal of privilege, eventually you reach a point of security where you don't worry about anybody else. The nicest, most helpful person on the staff was Frank Gifford. And Frank Gifford was, of course, the absolute king of New York sports. Zachy lived there then. Was there a higher ranking person in Third Avenue society than Frank Gifford? She's shaking her head back and forth. No. Gifford was the prince of the city. but he was the nicest one to me.
Okay, so your first football game, who was calling the game in Tennessee?
Keith Jackson.
Keith Jackson.
Keith Jackson. Hello again, everybody. I'm Keith Jackson. Big horse here alongside me, Frank Broyles. Frank, there's a possible moon in the sky over Birmingham, Alabama. These two teams don't like each other.
In 1993, we live in Oxford, Mississippi. Alabama came to town to play Ole Miss, and ABC had the game, and everything was sold out. And we had a little small guest cabin on the property, and I talked to Renee, so we agreed to do it. We contacted the people at Ole Miss, and we said, hey, we got a nice place to stay for somebody, the ABC crew, whoever. If they can't get rooms, they were staying in Memphis, an hour away. And they said, sure. So we had Keith Jackson and his wife for the weekend, and that was a real treat.
It's your kind of guy. Who's from Bremen, Georgia.
Georgia, yeah.
He was a paratrooper in the Korean War. He was a one-handicap golfer who never played a decent round of golf in his life. You know the type, right?
Yeah, right. And he had Bob Greasy with him, Lynn Swan. That was the crew back then. But for years it was, who did Bud Wilkinson call games?
Frank Broyles, beginning after my first season. My first season, there was a cavalcade because Bud Wilkinson was in the process of phasing out. Bud had been with Keith, and prior to him with Chris Schenkel. Because the first year that I did the sidelines in 1974 was also the first year that Keith was the A-game play-by-play on college football, succeeding Chris Schenkel, who was known for the stereotype Chris Schenkel opening, different from the stereotype Keith Jackson opening. The stereotype Chris Schenkel opening was, it's a beautiful day for football, it's a beautiful crowd, it's a uniquely beautiful stadium, all the people are beautiful. Chris never had a negative word to say about anything. Keith was a little bit more, how you say, discerning.
How close were you to Howard Cosell?
Not. But ultimately, obviously he was belittling me from afar for a while. Howard was Monday Night Football and boxing, and I had no reason to believe that I would have anything ever to do with Monday Night Football and boxing. Eventually, as you know, John, I succeeded Howard Cosell as the halftime highlight voice on Monday Night Football, traveling the country usually shoulder to shoulder with my buddy O.J. Simpson. So Cosell and I were oil and water. He belittled me from afar. And then eventually, 1978, the network conceived a magazine, quote, journalism show for Cosell, and that consisted of Howard sitting in the studio doing an interview every Sunday with one of his four big buddies in the sports entrepreneur business, and somebody had to go out on the road and do a feature piece, and I became that person. By that point, I had an office right down the hall from him. I had a fair amount of contact with him. I got to know him about as well as anybody would ever want to.
And he's a complete jerk, right?
Beyond.
Well, back in those days, early 70s, when I was in high school, Monday Night Football was sacred, and we loved Dandy Don Meredith and Cosell and Gifford. We never missed a game, but Cosell was despised in the South, probably everywhere, but especially down south.
He aimed for that. He wanted that particular persona. Cosell's genesis in the sports television business is bizarre to begin with, because Roone Arledge, the iconic and legendary president of ABC Sports, his first niche as a chief executive was head of children's programming at NBC. And as head of children's programming at NBC, Arledge would take a limousine every Saturday morning from Westchester County down to the city to go into the NBC studios and run the cartoon and other kinds of shows that he was in charge of. And in the car on the way down to New York, he would listen to a Little League baseball radio show out of Scarsdale. And the Little League baseball radio show in Scarsdale was hosted by an attorney named Howard Cosell. So Arledge heard this voice, this unique, odd voice, doing Little League Baseball. Little Stevie Shepler, a center fielder of spectacular skill and potential, etc., etc. And Arledge heard this and thought, this is unique. Maybe I can do something with this. And that's what gave us Howard Cosell.
I was watching a fight the other night, not preparing for this. I love to go to YouTube and watch the old fights. I was watching Muhammad Ali fight this unknown German guy in Germany. I forget his name.
Koopman.
No,
Not Billy Koopman.
No, it was something like Blin, Jürgen Blin or something like that.
Oh, Jürgen Brennan, yeah.
He was a journeyman fighter. It wasn't much of a fight. But I watched it for a couple of rounds, and it struck me at just two things. How great Ali was. How quick his feet, he pounded the guy.
Yeah, he had unbelievable talent. And the only fighter ever before him who had similar talent was a welterweight and middleweight named Sugar Ray Robinson.
Sugar Ray Robinson.
Ali more or less adapted his style from that of Sugar Ray Robinson.
But the other half of it was, and I hate to admit this, was how good Cosell was calling the fight.
Well,
he was really,
he is in the pantheon of great broadcast boxing announcers, and I shouldn't be the one to point out that most people who make that list, I'm on the list too, but Howard probably had the biggest public impact of any television boxing blow-by-blow guy ever.
So you became a boxing expert. You're in the Boxing Hall of Fame. How many announcers are in the Boxing Hall of Fame?
There are probably 7 or 8 of us who are in the boxing. There's a British guy named Reg Gutteridge. There's Don Dunphy, who was, iconic in my youth for his Gillette Friday night fights. There maybe only 4 or 5, but Cosell is in there too.
Did you ever box?
Did I ever box?
Yeah.
One time.
Yeah.
Yeah, at the summer camp I went to in Hendersonville, North Carolina, as a 5th or 6th grader, I recall being in a ring with big, heavy boxing gloves on and getting outclassed by somebody I didn't know.
Yeah. My boxing career didn't last long either. After football season one year, the coach thought it'd be smart to have us, box each other to stay in shape. And we did a lot of boxing. We tried to learn some of the basics. But I had a fight one day with a buddy of mine. We boxed, and we, for about 5 minutes, just beat the daylights out of each other. And we both had bloody noses, and we, our eyes were swollen, and we're just pounding each other. And we stopped at the same time and said, "What the hell are we doing? This is the dumbest sport in the world."
That was an intelligent response.
And I quit. I said, "I'll never do it." But no kidding, I had knots on my head for a week. It ached my ears rang for a week, and I thought, this is stupid. Who would do this for a living? Who would? I guess a lot of people.
Well, I mean, let's face it. Most athletes who ultimately gravitated to boxing did so out of economic desperation. And many of the greatest fighters in the sport were people who came from the most impoverished of circumstances and needed a way out and found their way out through the gym. And some of them wound up making incalculable sums of money because of the way the sport concentrates. Well, 90% of boxers are going to go their whole careers without ever making serious money.
Yeah.
But a few will make a lot.
We can talk about Ali and George Foreman and Mike Tyson and Manny Pacquiao and these great boxers for hours and hours. We have 8 minutes to go. I'm sorry, it's almost pushing 7. Time for a couple of questions from you guys. Anybody got a question?
Jim.
Yes, sir, Jim.
I'll do one. Lampley, when you were working for us at CHL, one of the things we always said, you were preceded by Charles Geralt. Charles Geralt didn't become Charles Geralt after he got to CBS. You were Jim Lampley when you were a student at CHL. And I remembered saying to you at the time that I thought you had, with your talent, you could have a bigger impact on the world if you went to serious news and went out there and reported things that really mattered to the world. And I wondered if you ever gave that any thought.
Jim, repeat the question.
So he wonders if
whatever it was, please repeat it, okay?
He wonders if I ever considered gravitating from sports to news. Okay. Well, and by the way, Patricia Parker is here. She was the chair of the communication department when I came here to teach several years ago. She was the one who invited me, and I taught a course that related not to sports broadcasting, that related to news. The title of the course was Evolution of Storytelling in American Electronic News Media. She allowed me to do that because eventually, via a long and circuitous route, I did indeed become a news anchor at KCBS TV in Los Angeles. I had contracts with both ABC News and CBS News. I did quite a lot of news coverage within the sports envelope. So your instinct that I could have been a newscaster was right. In fact, if I had handled my politics well at CBS, and I had not done certain things away from my career path that caused a lot of negative attention and got me into a certain amount of public trouble, there's a theory by which you could have seen me as Dan Rather's successor on the CBS Evening News. That was possible. I blew that, okay, with a variety of different misbehaviors, most especially falling in love with my co-anchor at KCBS TV, marrying her, and basically blowing up the station's management so that 2 or 3 people's careers, not mine, were soiled by our behavior. But yes, your instinct was right. I probably could have been a newscaster. I wound up doing a lot of things within my sports career that were devoted to what amounted to covering the news events that emerged from sports. There was a riot at a boxing match that I covered. There was the shooting at the Centennial Park Atlanta Olympics opening night in 1996. There were a variety of other things where I switched immediately from sports to news, and it was one of those things that ultimately made me, for a period of a couple of years, the local news anchor, 5 o'clock and 11 o'clock at KCBS TV in Los Angeles. I covered an earthquake my very first week as a news anchor, and the very first day that I was a news anchor, a guy named Patrick Edward Purdy walked onto a schoolyard in Stockton, California, and shot 22 elementary school children. So I had to learn immediately how to govern my emotions within a situation like that, and I was not good at that. If I had an Achilles heel as a newscaster, it was that something extreme like that could get to my emotions.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Take
Yeah.
Take this.
Appreciate you being here, Jim. I've got a question. You're talking about all your great experiences. I can't imagine anybody.
Go ahead.
Okay, that's fine. Get closer. Okay. You were talking about your
varied experiences worldwide, people, everything else. Is there anything that stands out to you? I guess if you had to say what was the most rewarding thing or experience or whatever.
It still rewards me to this day, and still comes up to this day. Going back to Jim's question about news, the 1980 Lake Placid Olympics, my assignment had nothing to do with sports. It ultimately turned out to be, I was the person who was going to report on all of the organizational screw-ups and management screw-ups that afflicted those games. You may remember they wound up with thousands of people standing in remote parking lots in sub-freezing weather, holding tickets to events who never got picked up by buses that didn't exist. It was a horrible snafu, and that was part of my beat. The other part of my beat was the effort on the part of the International Olympic Committee, the United States Olympic Committee, and some others to move, delay, or cancel the Moscow Games. There was an ongoing tug of war that was taking place within the IOC structure. They were meeting at Lake Placid during those Olympics, and I was covering that. So I was removed from my sports assignment, which had been bobsleds. Somebody else went to cover bobsleds. And I was, on Friday afternoon before the last weekend of those games, I was in an edit bay in our broadcast center, putting together a compendium piece about all of my political coverage that would air on the closing ceremony show on Sunday, 2 days later. And at that same moment,
Very bizarre circumstance. The United States was playing the Soviet Union in what amounted to a semifinal hockey game, and because the Soviets had refused to move the schedule from 5 o'clock to 8 o'clock, the game was not on television. There are millions and millions of Americans who believe they watched The Miracle on Ice live on television. They did not. They saw a tape delay that night. But I saw it live because at the end of the first period, when a tiny player named Mark Johnson, who was for 2 weeks the leading goal scorer in hockey, slipped into the Russian zone and slipped the puck under the glove of the greatest goalie in the world, Vladislav Tretiak, to tie the score at 2-2. Rune Arledge was known for his golden gut. Rune Arledge was given credit for having a unique ability to understand when something was going to happen that might be meaningful. As soon as Johnson scored that goal, the red phone in our edit bay lit up. Now, the red phone was the Arledge phone. The only time the red phone would ever ring was Arledge. I had been at ABC Sports for 6 years. I had never seen a red phone ring. And now the light was on and the red phone was ringing. And both the tape editor and the producer turned to me and said, "All yours. You're the senior person here." So I picked up the phone, heard Rune's voice. He said, "I'm looking for Jim Lampley." I said, "Rune, this is me. What are you doing?" Told him what I was doing. "Drop that. You can finish that later. We've got 2 days to worry about that. I want you to go over the hockey arena right now. Need you to get into the hockey arena because we have booked 7 minutes at the end of the game now before we go off the air for some kind of an interview if something happens, and I have a feeling that something bizarre is about to happen. So go over and get into the hockey arena." Last thing I said to him was, now this is 8 years after Munich, all right? 8 years after Munich, if you didn't have the right credential, you weren't getting into an Olympic event. Security was overwhelming, and it should have been. And I said to him, "Rune, I don't have the right credential. I'm not going to be able to get into the hockey arena." And he said, "You'll get in," and hung up the phone. So I walked through the snow 250 yards from the edit bay to the hockey arena. Thank you, Zachy. And the first person I ran into was the Lake Placid High School hockey coach who was the venue manager. I had met him 4 days before. I don't even remember how I'd met him, but I had met him. And I told him my plight, and he ushered me in, and I wound up standing on a camera platform for 2 periods with one other person, the folk singer from Long Island, Harry Chapin, who had done a concert in the Olympic Village the night before. When the third goal was scored, Buzzy Schneider on a slap shot from behind the blue line, Chapin and I grabbed each other and jumped up and down. Cameramen turned around and said, "Stop that! You're fouling up our shots." When Eruzione scored the goal that made it 4-3, Chapin and I again grabbed each other, jumped up and down. The cameramen did the same thing. Harry and I never exchanged identities, hellos, words, anything, just the 2 hugs. And when the game was over, I had to race down to the American locker room. I stood outside. I yelled and yelled at players. I couldn't get anybody to listen. The only one who turned around was the last guy out, and that was Mike Eruzione. And we had the same agent. Okay, we were connected via the same agent. And I said, "Mike, I need you." And I can't do that. I'm going to dinner with Jimmy Craig. Guess who's buying dinner? And we wound up at the end of the evening standing in the main street of Lake Placid with 7,000 or 8,000 people arrayed behind us to do this interview in front of the ABC camera. And in the years since then, and I talk about how it reverts and plays back, in the years since then, I have run into Mike probably 4 or 5 times at commemoration events, Olympic committee events, things of that nature. And every time I see him, I say, "Mike, via the vehicle of instant replay, videotape replay, you are the leading goal scorer now in the history of hockey." And every time he says, "Lamps, keeps going in, doesn't it?" And it does. And so that's the answer to your question about the rule.
Appreciate it. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So I grew up in a great era as you with boxing, right? Following boxing. What do you see happening now as we move forward?
Well, boxing is dead and has been for 110 years. So, you know, I fully expect that for the next 110 years, boxing will also be dead. But, you know, an entrepreneurial sport like that, which provides a pathway for people who have no other path, it's never going to go away. And what is more entertaining and less requires explanation and technical understanding than two guys standing in the ring hitting each other. Now, obviously, it's a profoundly technical sport, and there is overwhelming craft in boxing. And what it reveals about people's personalities, to me, outstrips any other sport. And that's part of my romance with it. But at the end of the day, via whatever communications medium, that's where change takes place. Via whatever financial base, change takes place there too, to a certain degree. 50, 60, 80 years from now, I always say this: as long as human beings can stand up and walk, men and or women will fight each other for money. It's just logic. Yes, sir.
I'm ending this thing.
All right,
I just want to say that
I'm done.
that's fantastic. He did not tell you everything that's in the book. He tried, but the book is still worth buying and reading. And the interesting thing about it, he didn't cover the fact that it is called It Happened, comes from his famous boxing call when 45-year-old George Foreman knocked out 26-year-old Michael Moorer, and Jim didn't have anything to say other than, "It happened." And so the idea that he's told the whole book is nowhere close to it. There's so many other things. One of the words in the subhead of the book is lucky. I mean, a uniquely lucky career in sports broadcasting, and you'll find out he's not only one of the most talented people in that profession, but just completely engulfed in good fortune. And Deborah Lampley, who's standing right there, is probably the best fortune he's ever had. Now we're going to be at the back table. If anybody wants to come by and have their book signed and engraved, we'll be happy.
Not if. When now? Come buy your books.
I'd also since you introduced Deborah, and that was entirely correct, my daughter Amanda Tova Rose Clemens, my daughter Andrea Lane Walker Morris, my son-in-law Alan Morris, and who do we have? Sierra? And Sierra Jane Morris, all in the back of the room, beloved family members. When did Sierra get here? Sierra's 8 days old? 8 days old. Wow.